The Aurora Chapel on Meridian Station was a masterpiece of architecture and light. Crystalline walls caught and refracted the nebula beyond, painting the white runner in swirls of purple and gold. 200 guests filled the polished pews, their whispers creating a soft symphony of anticipation. Nyla Reed stood at the entrance in her grandmother's restored wedding gown, her fingers trembling around a bouquet of starflowers and earth roses. She had imagined this moment for a year. Lucas Stratton, charming and ambitious, would be waiting at the altar with that easy smile that had first attracted her. They would exchange vows, begin their life together as partners in the growing frontier of space colonization. It was supposed to be perfect. But as Nyla's eyes traveled down the aisle, her heart stumbled painfully. The altar was empty except for Chaplain Morris, whose expression held deep sympathy and professional distress. The music continued playing, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding. Nyla's maid of honor, Kara Singh, rushed to her side. "Nyla, I don't know what happened. Lucas was here an hour ago. He seemed nervous, but I thought that was normal wedding jitters." The murmurs began rippling through the congregation like a wave. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward Nyla, watching her humiliation crystallize in real time. Her mother, seated in the front row, had gone pale. Her father stood halfway, torn between comforting his daughter and hunting down the absent groom. Time fractured into strange, sharp moments. Nyla noticed absurd details with painful clarity: a child's dropped toy, the way light played across the chaplain's silver hair, the suffocating weight of so many watching eyes. Her mind catalogued everything except the truth she couldn't yet process: Lucas wasn't coming. Then the side door opened with a sound that silenced even the whispers. Damon Stratton emerged, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 34, Lucas's older brother was everything his younger sibling wasn't: controlled where Lucas was impulsive, commanding where Lucas was charming. As governor of Meridian Station, Damon held more power than anyone else in this sector of space. His tailored charcoal suit fit him perfectly, and his dark eyes swept the room with the kind of authority that made entire councils fall silent. Nyla had met Damon perhaps a dozen times during her engagement to Lucas. He'd always been polite but distant, his penetrating gaze seeming to assess and catalog everything. She'd found him intimidating, too intense, too controlled. Lucas had laughed about his brother's seriousness, calling him the robot governor behind his back. Damon walked toward Nyla with measured steps, his expression carved from stone. The chapel fell into absolute silence. When he reached her at the head of the aisle, he spoke in a voice pitched low enough for only her to hear, yet somehow carrying weight that reached every corner of the room. "Nyla, my brother is a coward who doesn't deserve you. He left 2 hours ago on a transport to New Vegas with a woman named Sienna Marks. He sent me a message saying he couldn't go through with the wedding, that he'd made a mistake." The words landed like physical blows. Nyla felt her knees weaken, but before she could stumble, Damon's hand was at her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "I will not allow you to be humiliated like this," Damon continued, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "Not by my family, not in front of everyone you know. So I'm offering you a choice." To the absolute astonishment of everyone present, Damon lowered himself to one knee. The collective gasp from the congregation sounded like a wave crashing. "Marry me instead," Damon said clearly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that seemed to burn away everything else. "Today, right now. Let me give you back your dignity. Let me prove that not all Stratton men are faithless cowards." Nyla stared down at this man she barely knew, this powerful stranger who was offering to upend his entire life in a single impulsive moment. She should refuse. Every rational part of her screamed that this was insane, that marrying someone out of pride or revenge or whatever complicated emotion was driving this offer would be a disaster. But another part of her, the part drowning in humiliation and heartbreak, saw something in Damon's expression that stopped her refusal. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even primarily about saving her from embarrassment. There was something else in those dark eyes, something that looked almost like longing barely contained. "Why?" Nyla whispered. "Why would you do this?" Damon stood, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because I've watched my brother take you for granted for a year. Because you deserve better. And because if you walk out of this chapel unmarried, everyone will remember your humiliation. But if you walk out as my wife, they'll only remember the day Damon Stratton claimed the woman his brother was fool enough to abandon." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a business proposition wrapped in protection. And somehow that brutal honesty made it more compelling than any romantic speech could have been. Nyla looked past Damon to the congregation, to her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's clenched fists, the friends and relatives who had traveled across light years to witness her happiness. She thought about walking out of this chapel alone, about the pitying messages and awkward encounters that would follow her for years. Then she looked back at Damon Stratton, this enigmatic man who knelt before her offering salvation in the most unexpected form. There was something in his eyes, something that suggested this wasn't entirely about protecting her dignity. Something deeper, older, carefully hidden until this moment. "Yes," Nyla heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll marry you." Damon's expression shifted, something unreadable flickering across his features before he stood and turned to face the stunned congregation. "Chaplain Morris," he called out, his voice carrying the authority he used in council chambers. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony?" The elderly chaplain blinked several times as if trying to determine whether he was experiencing a vision or a breakdown. "Governor Stratton, this is highly irregular. I cannot simply substitute grooms." "The license has my family name on it," Damon countered smoothly. "Stratton. The contract is with the family. Nyla has consented. Unless there's a legal impediment, I see no reason why we cannot continue." Chaplain Morris looked to Nyla, his expression gentle. "My dear, are you certain? Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a performance." Nyla felt Damon's presence beside her, solid and unshakable. She thought about Lucas, who had promised to love her and then fled rather than face his doubts. She thought about this man beside her, who barely knew her but was willing to bind himself to her rather than see her destroyed by humiliation. "I'm certain, Chaplain." What followed felt like moving through a dream. Nyla walked down the aisle on her father's arm, though her father kept whispering urgent questions she couldn't fully process. Damon waited at the altar, his posture relaxed but his eyes tracking her every movement with an intensity that made her skin warm. The ceremony proceeded with surreal efficiency. When Chaplain Morris asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute and charged with disbelief. Damon's responses were clear and unhesitating. When it came time for rings, he smoothly produced his own signet ring and slipped it onto Nyla's finger. It was too large, spinning loosely, but the warm metal against her skin felt strangely right. "I, Damon Alexander Stratton, take you, Nyla Marie Reed, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded less like obligation and more like claiming. Nyla repeated her vows, her voice gaining strength with each word. When Chaplain Morris pronounced them husband and wife, Damon cupped her face with both hands and kissed her with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his commanding presence. It was brief, appropriate for a chapel ceremony, but Nyla felt it down to her toes. There was heat there, carefully controlled, and a promise of something far more complex than either of them was ready to acknowledge. They turned to face the congregation as husband and wife. Nyla saw shock, confusion, and something that might have been admiration. Her mother was weeping. Her father looked thunderous. And in the third row, Lucas's parents sat frozen in horror. As they walked back down the aisle, Damon's hand possessive at her waist, Nyla had one clear thought: she'd just married a stranger to avoid humiliation. Now she had to figure out what came next. The governor's residence occupied the highest level of Meridian Station's central tower, with panoramic windows offering breathtaking views of space. Nyla stood in the vast entryway, still wearing her grandmother's wedding gown, feeling like an actress who had wandered onto the wrong stage. Damon moved past her, already loosening his tie with one hand while issuing commands into his comm device with the other. "Your suite is in the East Wing," he said, his tone businesslike. "I've arranged for your belongings to be transferred from your apartment. They'll arrive tomorrow morning. Everything you need for tonight is already prepared." Nyla turned to face him, suddenly aware of how little they discussed about the practical realities of their situation. "Damon, we should talk about what this actually means. What you expect from me." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "I expect nothing beyond what you're willing to give. This marriage can remain purely legal if that's what you prefer. Separate quarters, separate lives. A partnership on paper only. Or we can explore what else it might become. The choice is yours, Nyla. I won't pressure you." There was something both reassuring and frustrating about his careful neutrality. Nyla found herself wanting to push past his controlled exterior, to understand what had truly motivated his dramatic intervention. "Why did you really do it?" she asked quietly. "The truth, Damon. Not the explanation you gave everyone else." Damon crossed to the windows, his hands sliding into his pockets as he gazed out at the stars. For a long moment, Nyla thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a roughness she hadn't heard before. "Do you remember the resource summit on Europa Station last year? You wore a green dress that matched your eyes, and you spent 2 hours talking to the colony representatives about sustainable agriculture. Lucas was networking with investment bankers, too busy to notice how you made every person feel heard and valued." Nyla did remember that night, though she was surprised Damon had even been aware of her presence. He'd seemed occupied with governmental matters throughout the evening. "I watched you," Damon continued, still not turning to face her. "I watched the way you listened to people, really listened, not just waited for your turn to speak. I watched Lucas ignore you for most of the night, treating you like an accessory to be retrieved when convenient. And I remember thinking my brother was the biggest fool I'd ever known." He finally turned, and the expression on his face stole Nyla's breath. It wasn't his usual neutral mask, but something raw and honest and almost painful to witness. "I've been watching you for a year, Nyla. Every family dinner, every station event, every casual encounter. I've memorized the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're nervous, the way your eyes light up when someone asks about your terraforming research, the way you always include whoever's standing alone at parties. And I've spent a year telling myself you were my brothers, that my attraction to you was inappropriate and needed to be controlled." Nyla felt her heart hammering. "You never said anything. You barely spoke to me." "Because speaking to you made it worse," Damon admitted, frustration entering his voice. "Every conversation reminded me how perfectly unsuited you were to Lucas, how much you deserved someone who would treasure you. So I kept my distance and tried to convince myself what I felt was just passing attraction." He moved closer, and Nyla found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his eyes. "When I saw you standing at that altar, abandoned and humiliated, something in me simply broke. I couldn't let you walk out of that chapel alone. I couldn't let his cowardice define your day. And if I'm being completely honest, some selfish part of me saw an opportunity to have what I'd convinced myself I could never have." Before Nyla could respond, the residence's main door chimed. A woman entered, her purple skin shimmering slightly under the lights, marking her as Valorian. She wore elegant diplomatic robes and carried herself with natural grace. "Governor Stratton, Mrs. Stratton," she said, her melodic voice carrying the characteristic Valorian accent. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Ambassador Lyra, stationed here as Valorian liaison. I wanted to offer my congratulations and assistance during this unusual transition." "Ambassador," Damon said, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Your timing is impeccable as always." Lyra's violet eyes moved between them with knowing assessment. "I've been monitoring station communications. The media coverage of your wedding is extensive. You'll both need support navigating the political and social implications. Over the following days, a routine developed, awkward and careful. Damon left early each morning and returned late, maintaining the polite distance he'd promised. Nyla threw herself into her terraforming research, trying not to think about the man sleeping in a different wing of the residence, or the confession he'd made that first night that it was Lyra who became Nyla's anchor. The Valorian ambassador visited daily, ostensibly for diplomatic briefings but really to check on Nyla's well-being. They would have tea in the residence's garden, a biodome filled with plants from a dozen worlds, and Lyra would listen without judgment as Nyla processed her complicated emotions. "He's in love with you, you know," Lyra said one afternoon, 3 weeks into the marriage. "Damon. He has been for quite some time." Nyla set down her cup, her hand trembling slightly. "He said he was attracted to me." "That's not the same thing. For a man like Damon Stratton, who controls every aspect of his life with rigid discipline, attraction is love," Lyra said gently. "He doesn't do anything halfway. If he's allowed himself to feel anything for you, it runs much deeper than he's admitted." "Then why does he avoid me?" Nyla asked, frustration bleeding through. "We barely speak. We're like strangers sharing an address." "Because he's terrified," Lyra replied. "Terrified that if he gets close to you, you'll realize you made a mistake. That you'll leave him like Lucas left you. He's protecting himself the only way he knows how, through distance." That evening, Nyla decided to bridge the distance herself. She waited in the residence's main room until Damon arrived home, then stood before he could escape to his wing. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Really talk. Not careful political pleasantries, but honest conversation about what this marriage is and what we want it to be." Damon studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Nyla said. "Starting with why you really hate Lucas so much that you'd marry his abandoned bride just to prove a point." Something flickered across Damon's face, old pain mixing with anger. "I don't hate Lucas. I pity him. He spent his entire life taking the easy path, choosing comfort over courage. Our father built this station from nothing, sacrificed everything to create something that would last. When he died, someone needed to carry that legacy forward. Lucas was too young, too uncertain. So I set aside my own dreams and learned to govern." "What dreams?" Nyla asked softly. "I wanted to explore," Damon admitted. "Not govern a station, but actually go out there," he gestured to the stars beyond the windows, "and discover new worlds. I had plans to join a deep space expedition. Then duty called, and I answered because someone had to." "And you resent Lucas for not sharing that burden," Nyla said, understanding dawning. "I resented that he got to be carefree while I carried the weight," Damon corrected. "But watching him waste his freedom, watching him have you and not appreciate what he had, that made me furious in ways I couldn't explain." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message on Damon's comm device. His expression darkened as he read it. "Lucas is back on station. He's requesting to meet with you." Nyla's stomach dropped. "What does he want?" "Apparently, he's realized his mistake. He wants you back." 3 months into their marriage, Nyla's life had settled into an unexpected pattern. Her days were filled with terraforming research and increasingly frequent collaboration with Damon on station governance. Her evenings were spent with Lyra, learning Valorian meditation techniques and discussing the complexities of cross-cultural relationships. And her nights were spent lying awake in her suite, hyper-aware that Damon was in his wing, equally sleepless if the late-night lights she'd noticed were any indication. But everything changed the day Lucas requested the meeting. They met in a neutral conference room, Damon, Nyla, Lucas, and Ambassador Lyra, who insisted on attending as an objective witness. Lucas looked haggard, his usual charm dimmed by obvious stress. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his clothes were rumpled in a way the old Lucas never would have tolerated. "Nyla," he began, reaching across the table toward her. She pulled back instinctively, and hurt flashed across his face. "Please, just listen." "I'm listening," Nyla said, her voice steady despite the churning emotions inside her. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of distress she remembered from arguments past. "I panicked. Standing in that chapel, knowing I was about to make a lifetime commitment, it all felt so final, so permanent. I got scared that we'd end up like our parents, staying together despite being miserable. So I ran." "With another woman," Damon said coldly. "Let's not forget that detail." "Sienna meant nothing," Lucas protested. "She was just there. Available. A distraction from my own fears. It was the biggest mistake of my life." "So you ran," Nyla said flatly. "You left me standing in front of everyone we know, wearing my grandmother's wedding gown, waiting for a groom who never came. You chose the absolute worst possible way to handle your doubts." "I know," Lucas said miserably. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Nyla, we can fix this. What you did with Damon, marrying him out of anger or revenge or whatever it was, we can annul it. We can start over, do this right." Nyla stared at him, really seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Lucas was handsome, charming when he wanted to be. But fundamentally, he was someone who chose comfort over courage every time a difficult decision arose. "You think I married Damon out of revenge?" she asked quietly. "What else could it be?" Lucas shot back. "You barely know him. He's my brother, for God's sake. The whole thing is insane." "You're right that I barely knew him," Nyla agreed. "But I'm learning. And what I'm learning is that Damon has more integrity than you've shown in the entire year we were together. He saw me at my most vulnerable and chose to protect me. Where were you? Watched you both fall in love over these months. That carries weight diplomatically." "It won't be enough," Damon said. "Thornton has allies on the council. They'll demand proof, evidence, something undeniable." Nyla took a deep breath, knowing what she had to reveal. "Then we give them proof. We tell them everything, including that I was a virgin until last night. That I never consummated my engagement to Lucas. That would be impossible to fake for political convenience." Damon's expression froze. "Nyla, that's extremely private. Are you certain you want to expose that publicly?" "I'm certain that I won't let Thornton destroy what we've built," Nyla said firmly. "And I'm certain that the truth is our strongest weapon." Within days, a formal hearing was scheduled. The station council would examine the legitimacy of their marriage and determine whether Damon's position as governor was compromised. The outcome would determine not just his political future, but the future of their relationship. As they prepared for the hearing, working late into the night, Nyla realized something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just fighting for Damon's position, they were fighting for their right to love each other, to build a life together without shame or pretense. "Whatever happens," Damon said one night, pulling her close, "I don't regret any of it. Marrying you was the best decision I've ever made." "Even if it costs you everything?" Nyla asked. "Especially then," he replied. "Because you're worth more than any political position. You're worth everything." As they faced the approaching hearing, Nyla felt certainty settle over her. They would tell their truth, expose the corruption, and prove that sometimes the most unconventional choices lead to the most genuine love. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time, Nyla knew they would face it together, as true partners, as lovers, as husband and wife in every sense that mattered. "Lucas? You were running away from your own choices." Lucas's face flushed with anger and shame. "So that's it? You're actually going to stay married to him? To my brother?" "I'm going to give this marriage a real chance," Nyla said, standing. Because Damon offered me something you never did: partnership, respect, and the promise to value me. You offered me comfort and complacency. I thought that was enough, but I was wrong. She walked toward the door, then paused. I hope you find what you're looking for, Lucas. I genuinely do. But it's not me, and I think we both know that now. As she left, she heard Lucas's angry protest and Damon's calm, cold response. In the corridor, Lyra caught up with her, the purple-skinned ambassador's expression approving. That took courage, Lyra said. How do you feel? Relieved, Nyla admitted. And ready to stop pretending this marriage is just political convenience. That evening, everything changed. Nyla was reviewing research data when Damon's assistant contacted her urgently. There had been a leak, confidential files suggesting Lucas's abandonment hadn't been cold feet at all, but a calculated plan. Someone had paid him to humiliate Damon publicly, to damage his reputation and position as governor. When Damon arrived home, his expression was carved from ice. Marcus Thornton, he said, his voice deadly quiet. My primary political rival. He paid Lucas 50,000 credits to abandon you at the altar, knowing the scandal would undermine my authority. Nyla felt fury rise in her chest. Lucas sold me out? Sold us both out for money? The communications are clear. Thornton wanted to destabilize my governorship, and Lucas was weak enough to take the deal. Damon's hands clenched into fists. I'm going to destroy them both. No, Nyla said firmly. We're going to expose them. Legally, publicly, in a way that leaves no doubt about their corruption. And we're going to do it together. Damon looked at her, something shifting in his expression. Together. Yes. Because that's what partners do. They face challenges together. She crossed to him, placing her hand on his chest. I'm done pretending this is just a political arrangement, Damon. I'm done keeping careful distance. These past 3 months, I've been falling for you, for your integrity, your passion for this station, the way you see me. So let's stop pretending and make this real. Damon's control visibly cracked. He pulled her against him, his kiss fierce and claiming and full of 3 months of restrained desire. Nyla responded with equal passion, her hands tangling in his hair, her body molding to his. Are you sure? He asked roughly when they broke apart. Once we cross this line. I'm sure, Nyla said, pulling him toward his bedroom. I've never been more sure of anything. What followed was intense and overwhelming. Damon's hands were everywhere, reverent and possessive. He worshipped her body with a focus that left her gasping, bringing her to heights she'd never imagined. When they finally came together, Nyla felt complete in a way she never had with Lucas. Afterward, they lay tangled in his sheets, the city lights of the station twinkling beyond the windows. Damon held her close, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. I love you, he said quietly. I've been in love with you since that Europa summit. Watching you with my brother was torture, but I told myself you were happy, that my feelings didn't matter. Finding out he abandoned you, it destroyed me and gave me hope simultaneously. Nyla turned to face him, her hand cupping his jaw. I love you too. I think I started falling that day in the chapel, watching you kneel before me. Everything since has just confirmed what I felt in that moment. You're the man I was supposed to marry all along. They made love again, slower this time, exploring and learning each other with growing confidence. As dawn approached, Nyla felt more at peace than she had in months. But their newfound happiness was about to be tested. The next morning, Marcus Thornton released a statement to station media. Governor Stratton's fraudulent marriage to his brother's abandoned fiancée is a calculated political move to gain sympathy. Sources close to the family confirm the entire arrangement was planned in advance to consolidate power. The accusation was devastating, not just because it was public, but because it struck at the heart of their relationship. Could they prove their marriage was real when it had started as exactly what Thornton claimed, a political calculation? Damon read the statement with cold fury. He's trying to force my resignation. If the council believes our marriage is fraudulent, they can remove me from office for ethics violations. Then we prove it's real, Nyla said. We fight back with the truth. Ambassador Lyra arrived within the hour, her violet eyes blazing. I can testify to the authenticity of your relationship. As an outside observer, I've